Welcome to Cartoon Creators, where we talk to the minds behind the shows that raised us. I'm your host, Tamar Lilienthal, and today we're talking to Scott Gray. Scott is known for being a story editor on Rugrats, as well as a writer of many of the show's broadcast episodes, video games, and even comic strips. He's also written and story edited on many other beloved shows, including shows like Arthur, The Backyardigans, and LazyTown, one of my personal favorites that I made sure to ask him about. We chat about his years on Rugrats, what it entails to be a story editor, and more. Let's get to the episode. Hi, Scott. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We're super excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tamara. I'm happy to be here. I know a lot of people who've spoken to you already, so I'm in good company. So
Ah,
thanks for doing this. Yeah.
well, we're glad you're going to join them. So, and what I've asked a lot of people who have come on the podcast, and I'd love to start off here, is, everyone has a story of how they ended up in this industry, in the kids space, in kids TV. I've heard quite a few already, including, one guest whose initial dream was to be a clown, and that somehow ended him up here. So, what is your story of how you ended up in the industry?
That's awesome. Not the clown route. No. My great uncle was Walt Disney. No. I knew no one coming out to town. Yes, the Scott Gray story. I'll try to make it brief. It was a dark and stormy night. Let's see. I grew up in Phoenix, and the first time I realized I enjoyed writing was probably, I think it was third grade, where I wrote a play that was like gangsters versus aliens.
Oh.
Yeah, a very fourth grade type play. And I forced my classmates to perform it, and that kind of gave me the bug. I don't know why I did that. I just loved it. Then I was the nerdy kid who like won the school spelling bees a couple years in a row. I won an essay contest in like eighth grade about like patriotism or some bland topic like that. But uh, early on, and I won like a medal in, I'm going way back, in like middle school, that was a writing letters and arts type medallion, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm good at this. I was a nerdy kid. My English teacher used to put my essays up in front of the class on the overhead projector, and everybody knew my horrible writing, so they'd be like, oh, it's Scott's essay again. So
Oh, man.
um, and then, I got into more. I also grew up on sitcoms, so I was a latchkey kid. My mom worked until after I got to a certain age. My mom worked part time, and so I grew up on Gilligan's Island, like the whole morning block in Arizona, Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, Honeymooners, even like Gomer Pyle. Even the obscure ones, F Troop. I just loved all that stuff and absorbed it. So like comedy writing became kind of ingrained in me. And when I went to college, I started out briefly in engineering, and then I switched to acting. So I did a year's worth of acting in the acting school there, and I would recommend that for any writer. Sure other folks have said that, but it's really invaluable to understand, how lines are performed, and the meaning behind lines and all that stuff. So acting is a great thing to do in general. But I was in the full-on program. I did like Kabuki Shakespeare for a year. It was horrible. My parents came and were like, "That was interesting, honey." So, they were very supportive, but it was a weird show. And anyway, toward the end of that stint, I was on probation anyway, and we did an improv class in acting class, and it was one of those like where you try to make your situation the worst. And one of my colleagues said, "Oh, my legs are broken," and I said, "Well, at least I have legs. At least you have legs." And it got like uproarious laughter from all the serious acting students, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe I should do this more. So a friend of mine at that point introduced me to the college sketch group. I went to Arizona State, and it's called The Far Side. It's still around. It's been around over 40 years now, I believe. We're coming up on 40 years. And I started writing sketches every week and performing in them, which again was very invaluable. You learn quickly the way to write a joke tightly. You learn audience reaction, what's going to play and what's going to not. So I kind of really fell in love with it there. And I studied broadcast journalism just because it was the easiest major in college. I'd put on a suit and talk about the bad conditions in school bathrooms. So
Sounds riveting
but
to me, so.
Yeah, no, seriously. It was everybody knew it was kind of an easy A, and I that's the first job I had out of college was doing audio visual work for years. I'll get to that. It was not terribly exciting, but at least it gave me the skills to do that, to get a foothold in LA. But after I graduated, I was like, oh, I'm going straight to Saturday Night Live now, because we had a big following. It really grew the time I was there. The local newspapers did articles on us. And so David Spade had been in that group early on. He grew up in Scottsdale. And I was like, I'm gonna call David Spade and get on SNL. So, so I did call David Spade. Believe it or not, I called SNL and explained I'd like to talk to David Spade and that I was an alumni. And it was before he was really popular. So
Oh,
he
wow.
actually took my call, um, and he talked to me for like 20 minutes probably. Super nice guy. His advice, unfortunately, was go to Harvard or do professional stand-up, and then SNL will you'll have a better shot at SNL. So
Oh, man.
yeah. So anyway, it was great to talk to him. That was cool. I did audiovisual work. I'll try to tie it up here. Did audiovisual work for several years, video editing. Moved to LA, got a foothold in a resort downtown here at the Biltmore, where I
Oh,
like
yes.
yeah, it's a very popular hotel here. And I ran Spotlight for George Carlin. I set up Eddie Murphy sound systems. And during that time, actually, before I left Arizona, I got an agent in upstate New York through a friend of mine in high school, Adam Beechin, who is a writer out here as well and has done a ton of stuff. I refer to us as the very, very low level Matt Damon and Ben Affleck because we've known each other for so long. But Adam hooked me up with this agent he'd gotten in upstate New York, and she's my agent when I moved out here. She hooked me up. It took 2 years from the time I moved out to have any meaningful bites on my writing. And I was writing spec scripts the whole time. I started writing spec scripts in college, sitcoms, and I moved out. This will date me. I had a Frasier spec and a Seinfeld spec, and
Wow.
yeah. And anyway, one of my agent in upstate New York, Sue Giordano is her name at the Hudson Agency. She's still around and she's great, by the way. She recommended me to her star client at the time who worked on Rugrats. And
Mm.
he got my foot in the door. I pitched 40 ideas to Rugrats. They took none. Um, so, but they were like, "You've got moxie, kid. We like that you tried so hard." And I got my first. That was my first produced script. I sold a few ideas to Disney before that, but I didn't end up writing the script. A gentleman named Jim Bates, who was on Timon and Pumbaa at the time, Jungle Cub. No, it's Jungle Cubs. Gave me my first produced credits. But anyway, after Rugrats, like I ended up freelancing for Rugrats a couple years, and then I staff wrote for them, and then I ended up story editing the last season of Rugrats, and that was kind of how I got into the industry. So
Wow.
yeah,
That is awesome. And I want to get to Rugrats very soon because I want to hear about that. I have a lot of questions about that. But I'm gonna move next to right to the hard hitting question. But I mean, your work has spanned pretty much every big popular show. Rugrats, as you mentioned, but also the Backyardigans, Curious George, Arthur, LazyTown, which I think I saw was like only a couple month engagement, but was one of my favorites growing up, so I must mention it.
oh,
Um,
cool.
yes, random,
There's
but
a
I
story
loved it.
there. Yes.
Oh my, well, please, I would love to hear it. But yeah, I guess my question is in that great breadth of work, what has been your favorite show to work on?
Sure. The Lazy Town story is interesting because I was only on it 3 months. It was the guy who ran Rugrats. Sorry, just to briefly can't go to Iceland and Lazy Town. It
Oh,
was
wait, I
based in
didn't even know
Iceland.
that.
Yeah, he was kind of already super popular in Iceland, the gentleman who created it, and uh, so it was based in Iceland. And the guy who ran it was my boss from Rugrats, so I followed him kind of to that next gig. But they ended up wanting everybody to move to Iceland, and my boss wasn't prepared to do that. So that's why it was such a short stint. But we'd go around to restaurants in Iceland with this gentleman and be like hanging out with a rock star. It was really fun.
Wow.
um, but my favorite show, I'd have to say Rugrats, honestly. It was. I actually have two others that I can mention briefly, if I can be wishy-washy. But
Yeah, of course. No need
if I
to
had to,
pick just one.
oh, good. If I had to pick one, it would be Rugrats because I will admit that coming in with my sitcom specs and all that stuff, I was like, I'm going to work on Frasier. I'm going to work on Seinfeld. And Rugrats was one of the first meetings I got. And at the time, I was like Angelica. I was like, this dumb baby show, like why do I want to do that? And then I actually watched some of them, and I was like, this is a really good show. And then I ended up feeling super fortunate that I got to be involved with it, of course. It was just, it was at the height of its popularity. It was the Deal years. So, there's this whole argument about which years are better, the early years, the Deal years, East Side,
Yeah.
West Side. Um, but so it was 5 years into its run, 6 years. It was still, I think, probably the number one cartoon at the time. The features were just coming out, so it was huge. I have never worked on a huger show, and these days I think it would be hard to do that. Uh, I don't anticipate working on a show that big unless you're like on Bluey.
Right. Right.
The breakout shows these days are few and far between just because there's so many. But that was part of it too. Like everybody knew the show, everybody was excited for me. The, the talent involved with that show was amazing. Like you'd be in the record sessions, which I got to go to several of, and every individual performer in Rugrats was a rock star, and they were so funny. Like you just sit there and it's like watching. They were all in the room together back then. It was like five or six of them, and it'd be like watching five stand-ups in a room together. You just laugh nonstop and riff because a lot of them had improv training, and we're just funny. And we're on-screen actresses too, and the voice
Yeah.
director is a voiceover guy too named Charlie Adler, and he was hilarious too. So it was a really fun group, and I got to meet actually going back to my early days watching sitcoms. Jack Riley was Tommy's dad, and he
Huh.
I knew from the Bob Newhart show actually growing up. He was God, what's his name, Mr. Carlin? I'm blanking now. He was Mr. Carlin. He was one of Bob's patients, so I was kind of like in awe of him. Um, and I met Debbie Reynolds one day, and I was so dumb. I don't know if I'd even seen. I was very young and dumb, and I don't know if I'd ever even seen Singing in the Rain yet. But I was just like, "Oh, hey, Debbie Reynolds, nice to meet you, Debbie Reynolds." It was like
Wow.
this. I
Wow.
was just thinking, this is how it goes. I show up and I'm on this number one show, meeting all these great people. So I never took it for granted. I was very grateful the whole time. But since it was my first staff experience, looking back, I see how special it was. And the other side of that, although I think we might get to this later, is they handed me a bunch of ancillary stuff. The showrunners liked me, and because it was so popular, there was like a national comic strip starting. They were starting to do video games, and I was super fortunate to be able to write on a lot of that stuff too. So, um, and then real quickly, my
Yeah,
other
no,
two
please.
shows. There was a show called Wally Kazam that was on Nickelodeon. This is around 2012, so it doesn't really fit the time frame of the show, but that was a great experience because it was the most familial feeling I've had to a show. I was in New York. We were in the 1515 skyscraper right in Times Square, all on the same floor, and literally like right next to you would be the executive, right next to you would be the story consultants, the educational consultants,
Wow.
the artists, so you could just walk around and discuss all levels of a show in real time, and everybody would be on board right away. It was amazing. um,
That's pretty unheard of these days. I mean, I interned actually uh, on a Nickelodeon show at some point in college, and it was a. Now I'm dating myself on the young end, but it was a still a COVID summer at that point, and I visited the offices at 1515 in Times Square, and they were empty. So,
oh wow.
yeah, to think of a sort of bustling Times Square Nickelodeon office, that sounds like it must have been really incredible.
Yeah, oh, that would be creepy to see. um, it was awesome. I mean, the execs would sit with us just in casual story meetings and hang out. It was amazing. So I love that familial feel, which is kind of rare in animation more and more, I feel like these days. And then the other show I would have to say as a standout in my later career is Sesame Street. I've been able to work on the Not Too Late Show with Elmo as a talk show, and I've done some other work for Sesame, and they are just as wonderful as you would imagine them to be, and as caring about children. And the fun part of that show that makes it totally unique is like you don't have to do any research. Like I grew up watching Sesame Street. You know how Cookie Monster talks, right?
Right,
So
right.
you know how they all talk. So that was really cool to work on that. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think those are so many just really awesome experiences. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like I got my homage to LazyTown in, so now I feel content.
Oh, good. Yeah, LazyTown has a niche group that still really love it. It's nice. So,
The very funny thing about LazyTown actually is that my family is originally from Brazil actually, and so when we'd be on vacation, we would turn on the kids. We'd go visit my family in Brazil, and we'd turn on the kids channel and sort of watch whatever. And LazyTown was often on in Brazil, and so I watched it in Portuguese. And it took me many years to discover that LazyTown was not originally in Portuguese.
uh,
But yes, great show, great show.
oh, that's
Uh,
awesome.
so yeah, I, as you mentioned, and I was very curious about this. So, you shared a little bit about sort of getting involved with Rugrats already, but I think that something that kind of really interested me was all that ancillary stuff, as you mentioned, um, that you got to be involved in. I feel like that, on the one hand, must be very familiar because it's all the same universe that you're kind of working off of. And on the flip side, might be super new. And, how do I translate kind of the episode style stuff into comic books or video games? So, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I was really lucky to be there again at that time. It was all just blowing up, and I think the staff was too busy. I was kind of the new guy too. I wasn't even on staff at that point, and there were staff writers, but they were busy writing the actual show.
Right.
So the showrunner at that time, John Cooksey, and his wife at the time, Allie Marie Matheson, who is Richard Matheson's daughter. On a side note, the
Huh.
big sci-fi writer. They were great, and they kind of broke me into all that stuff, and they helped me out on the first few. We co-wrote the first few together, and it was it was great. I mean, it was a lot less limiting. Like video games, I will say, are a lot less limiting than a TV format, almost in a bad way, because the video game scripts, a Rugrats script, animated 11-minute script is 15 pages. Generally it can be anywhere from 12 to 18 or 11, but maybe 15 pages on average. And video game scripts for the Rugrats stuff were like 100 pages.
Oh, wow.
Because you need to write like 10 different ways for Chucky to say, get that thing, or look
Yeah.
out, watch out for that. And then you go through all five Rugrats, or yeah, well, we had Angelica too, and do that. So it was a lot of gameplay dialogue like that. The cinematics, there were a ton of cinematics, the scenes in the video games that actually play out as scenes real time, and there's no gameplay involved. So there was a lot of freedom in that, more freedom than the show, and to come up with ideas, and you could stretch things more, I feel like. So the video games were super fun, and a lot of people I talk to these days, that's the thing they remember most. Like that's my legacy apparently
Oh.
is freaking kids out with the Rugrats video games.
Oh,
Because
that's so interesting.
yeah, some of them were a little, they got really out there with some of the gameplay, and that's what people appreciate. And a couple of them were bestsellers, which was nice, and they were reissued. And then I ended up doing a lot of them on my own afterwards. And so yeah, I love the video games. It was a lot of fun, and the comic strip was its own interesting animal. Like I grew up on Peanuts and Snoopy, and I used to love reading the Snoopy comic book compilations. I'd sit in the back car. I was an only child, and I'd just sit in the back car and read Snoopy comic strips as a child. So
Huh.
that was really, I was really proud of that. To be, I was the main writer for the comic strip, which was nationally syndicated for the first year about, and it was really a proud moment. And that was pretty free reign too. I got very few notes initially, and I'm lucky I could think like that. It's probably because I absorbed so much of it growing up. You got to think in quick jokes and like four panels and or less. And so that was really cool. And then there was some controversy about the strip because one of the characters, Grandpa Boris, apparently his depiction, I think it's probably true in the show too, resembled some sort of anti-Semitic propaganda from back in the day. And
Oh.
yeah, so it became oddly politically charged. It didn't really affect me or the writing, but it did get some weird PR there for a while. And on the flip side, we were featuring him because we were emphasizing, like just like the show did. We were emphasizing, here's Grandpa Boris and Temple. Here's we were playing to some some Jewish storylines, and at the request of the people behind it, and so that was interesting. And that's one of the things that's always an issue in showbiz, I guess, is misinterpretation of things. So anyway, I did that for a year, and then I transitioned off and on. Did it for another 2 years or so. Uh, and what else? The other ancillary stuff was, I did comic books. The comic books were fun too. Again, and honestly, I reused a lot of my stories that I pitched on the show proper. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just like reuse. I'll admit that now, and it was super fun. I wrote the comic book graphic novel adaptation of the Rugrats in Paris movie, which was like 50 pages.
Oh,
Had a lot
wow.
of fun doing that. I got to write the video game for Rugrats in Paris. So it was great. And again, like I feel like there was less control over those areas than the actual TV show. So it felt very freeing in a lot of ways. So
Yeah, it really seemed like you kind of went from, yeah, as I hear you describe it, it's like you had the normal broadcast scripts and then just kind of like the condensing into a couple panels of comics, the never-ending 100-page script of video games. So you really got to kind of go through all that, which is pretty cool. It's really really cool.
it was
So
fun. Yeah.
yeah.
I got the whole range of Rugrats. And the coolest ancillary thing I did actually I just remembered was I live chatted as I think it was Spike the dog. Um, it was right when live chat was starting, and I was online
Oh,
answering questions live with kids as Spike, Tommy's dog. So
wow.
that was super fun,
That's awesome.
and
That is so
totally nerve
random.
wracking too. But because I was like, what if I say something wrong and start this child live? So
Yeah. Yeah.
but thankfully it went well, and I had a little bit of improv training in my past, so that probably helped. But that was super fun too. So
Wow, no, that sounds super cool. So, you've done so many different things as you mentioned, and we've touched on a lot of them. But a lot of your credits just kind of include being a story editor on a bunch of different shows, of course, Rugrats included. But I'm curious, um, we found that we have sort of a really interesting mix of people who listen to our podcast, both people who work in the industry and are curious, and also people who don't and just feel nostalgic for the shows that we talk about. And so, in light of that, I would love if you could share a little bit, kind of like what is a story editor? What have you done on the many shows, again, including Rugrats, where you were in that role, and kind of what that's like?
sure, yeah. Well, again, like I'll go back to acting class, kind of where I was not the world's best actor, but I vividly remember a day, this was in college, where I was performing a class scene from The Glass Menagerie, one of Tennessee Williams' horribly depressing plays. That's part of the reason I couldn't stay in acting class. It's like everything is so depressing. But and the teacher at the end of it, he didn't say anything about my acting, but he was like, "How did you get this scene down to whatever it was, 10 minutes?" And I had
Mm-hmm.
gone through and story edited Tennessee Williams. So, and well, apparently, like he was like, I know it should be longer than this. I don't know what's missing. So that was really cool to have that experience. And when I first started writing, it was never a goal of mine per se. I just loved writing. Um, and writing is a lot different than story editing. Writing is very much the first draft. It's all the hard work. It's fighting in the trenches. I equate writing with like being a soldier on the front line. Story editing is really kind of the generals in back, plotting things. And I would pick, if I had to give up, if I could only do one the rest of my career, it would be writing, honestly. Just the process of writing. But story editing is a totally different animal, and in some ways, I feel like it's easier. And story editing at heart is taking all the scripts in a series and making sure they have a unified voice behind them, the voice that the showrunner wants or the person in charge of the show wants, that fits the show. So you could take any script from that season and feel like it's written by the same person. when in fact you have on most shows tons of freelance writers, anywhere from five to
Yeah.
who knows, 20, so that's really the story editor's job. Like uh, from the start, you kind of shepherd the premise. Freelancers. I'll just take it through a typical scenario. Like a freelancer would send you a premise for the show. If you take pitches, there'd be five of them. Maybe you pick one that really feels closest to the show. And a lot of times it's hard to get a premise through, so it may take work. And then you say, here, oh, I like this one. Here are some notes on this. Here's what we'd like to see more of, less of. Develop it this way to fit into the show more. And then, the writer comes back and hopefully hands you a premise that fits into the world of the show more. If not, like it's your job as story editor to make it fit. That's where you come in
Mm,
and do the work. And then those premises get submitted. Hopefully it gets approved to go to outline. So you work with the writer on outline. Then there will be notes on the premise. The notes process gets more and more as you go through the stages of a script. Premise ideally is the least notes because it's the smallest. Premises are anywhere from a paragraph to some shows have done like 3 4 pages for premise, but I feel like it's usually no more than a page. And if you're lucky, you probably will get more notes in a page, but maybe 2 or 3 notes on a premise, depending on how many note givers there are. So, and this is where I think the story editor's biggest job, aside from rewriting, I think the story editor's biggest job is translating notes to the writer and going through.
mm,
I make a point of doing this. I will go through every note and write what I think about it. Do this, don't do that. Here's how we're going to change this because you don't want a writer flying blind. You don't want to hand a writer a bunch of notes and say, good luck with that, or
right.
hey, try to make it more funny, or hey, So it's really the showrunner's responsibility to break the writer into the world of the show as much as possible. And for me, that always means like teaching them how to deal with notes and giving them guidance on all the notes. So, and it ends up benefiting the story editor as well because you'll get something back that is closer to what you want.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so it's a lot to do with the notes process and then rewriting. Like I will say that I think this is the case with most people. Rarely does a story editor not do some rewriting. And even with the best of writers, like I will go in and rewrite sections, and it's just kind of part of the job process. And it's never like, oh, I have to do my job, I have to change this. It's a story writer has access to all the people involved with the show, all the day-to-day decisions, all the background stuff going on, all the needs of the show. The other thing I should mention is often in addition to a story editor, there's a showrunner, although sometimes not. I've been story editor and essentially showrunner on several shows because there was no one higher above me in the writing process. But you also want to, make sure it's fitting the idea of the showrunner of what their show is.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so I will say, and there's only one person I've ever not rewritten a word of, and I'm glad there's not more of her because no one would need story editors. But, she knows who she is, and I've told her this numerous times. So just a kind of guidance to all writers out there: you will be rewritten, and
Right. Right.
I freelance on shows, I get rewritten on shows too. So, but it's not about that as much as do you understand the show in general, or is the structure there and all that stuff. So that can be the hardest part of story editing is rewriting. And you do get the scripts where it's a page one rewrite, and you have 3 days to do it before they need
Whew.
the polish or whatever. So,
Wow.
and yeah, yeah, it happens. I mean, but that's the job, and
Right.
um,
Right.
and it's again, I feel like story editing is easy to some degree. To back to my writing analogy, because I feel like it's always easier to look at something someone hands you and see the flaws in it, as
Right.
yeah, as opposed to something you've written, which is like your baby, and you're like, this is perfect. Um, so in that sense, I feel like story editor is almost easier than writing, um, because you have that distance from it already, and you're just kind of doing a review of it per se. So it's fun, it's more. I think it's probably more fun than writing because a lot of writers will tell you the funnest part about writing as having written, and finished.
Right.
So
Right,
um,
right. Totally.
the
Totally.
process can be pretty grueling. Although, with moments of inspiration, hopefully along the way. But for story editor, I feel it's very much like, oh, hey, you've done all the hard work. Now I get to go through and just hopefully just punch it up here and there, tighten it, shorten it, and that's what you usually get. You work with
Right.
writers who've done it a long time. It's usually a pretty streamlined process, and then occasionally you get a script you have to rewrite. But again, that just happens sometimes. So
Well, yeah, it's super, super cool. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it really helps give kind of some insight into uh, sort of the many different sides of the work that you've done and kind of the many different perspectives on storytelling that you've gotten to see and partake in. I think that that's really unique. I think we haven't had too many people on the podcast kind of with that breadth of experience, so that is super cool. And I know we're coming on our time, so um, before we kind of wrap up what's been an awesome chat, I'd love to hear, you've had a very long and sort of expansive career already. What are you and I know we talk about earlier shows and I know we kind of focus on our niche and what are you doing now? What is Scott
sure,
up to now?
sure. Um, it's a rough time in the industry now. I'm sure you know. Um,
Yes.
yes, jobs jobs have shrunk in general. So honestly, I'm on the hunt for work. I do have some work, but I haven't had a full-time job in several months now, and that's becoming kind of the golden ticket is finding full-time work these days. But I'm happy to still be doing some freelance stuff here and there. So just start off with that note that it is a hard time right now. So I but what I am excited about, and one of the bonuses of this is I've gotten to another. I recently updated my LinkedIn info and all that stuff, which I hadn't done for years. And a woman reached out to me on that, named Hafiza Mohammed, who is the CEO of a healthcare company called Backpack Healthcare. And it's a company that it's made up of therapists that deal with children and low income children, nonetheless, who struggle with mental issues. So they wanted someone to write apps for them online and to have it be entertaining and have a storyline to it and kind of engage kids in a way that will make them not excited to learn about mental health, but make it a pleasurable experience, make it something they're engaged in, and
Yeah.
so I was kind of in the phase of my life where I'm looking to give back. I'm grateful for all I've done, and I joined a charity years ago too. That's called Keeper. That's Kids Entertainment Professionals for Young Refugees, and it's online at keeper.org. And that was kind of the same reasoning. I'm like, I want to give back to the community. I want to give back to kids. So this job really came along in a great time in my life. I was kind of in need of something like that, and it's just been a joy. They're great to work with. They really care about kids, and we've created characters and worlds in these apps that are their own true worlds with fun characters like Stinky, the stinking thinking sea monster. And it's really nice to work on something that is not only fun but can literally make a difference in a kid's life. So that's been a great upside. I feel like preschool TV in general does that. Like a lot of preschool TV has lessons, which I really do think sink into kids at that age. Yeah, so that's the nice thing about preschool TV. So I'm doing that. I'm also working, just as just happened a couple of weeks ago, I'm working with a woman who played Angelica on Rugrats.
Oh wow.
Cheryl Chase has an idea for some podcast stuff she wants to do, and so I've been in contact with her, and that seems like it's going to be super fun. I have a screenplay that I've been shopping around for years. That's an animated holiday feature that has won several international awards and gotten some interest from Disney off and on. So fingers crossed. I would love to break into the feature world somehow. Never done that.
Cool.
And then last but not least, I'm also involved with a company called the Pitch Docs, which is kind of a consultant company made up of various people in the entertainment industry that will help people take their ideas and develop them out. So that's a new aspect for me too. I'm kind of entering this phase now where I'm lucky I've got enough credits and enough experience to kind of try to guide others, in projects. So yeah. But
That's an awesome collection of stuff. That is super cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, and
sure.
thank you so much for being on with us and sharing so much about your career, about Rugrats, about all sorts of awesome stuff. We've really appreciated having you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been an honor. Thank you again. Thanks again for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to Cartoon Creators. We would love if you connected with us on one of our social media channels. Have a comment, question, or an idea for a guest we should bring on to the pod? Email us at info@cartooncreators.com. Both words starting with a K, of course.